I have a satellite that I don't want anymore. Should I leave it just floating around in space? Should I crash it back into the planet and let it burn up in the atmosphere? These are the kind of things we need to talk about as the number of satellites is growing really, really fast. So at the moment in space, we have about 13,000 satellites. That's every alive or dead satellite that we've kind of ever launched. A few of them have been crashed into the atmosphere and burnt up already, but it's not very many. Most of them are still up there floating around. The problem is more companies are launching more and more satellites. So in the next few years, SpaceX want to launch 5 to 25,000 satellites. There's a Chinese company that wants to launch about 15,000 satellites. Amazon want to launch them. OneWeb want to launch them. More and more companies are launching these like constellations of satellites. So we need to talk about what we do with them at the end of their lives. So the issue is at the moment, if satellites are kind of left floating around in space, then there's a higher chance of them crashing into each other. When they crash into each other, they make debris, so pieces of metal, pieces of plastic, whatever, and these will kind of float around in space and keep flying around the Earth. They don't slow down. So at the moment when satellites are going around, they're traveling at about 15,000 miles per hour, so this is really, really fast. So then you have these tiny pieces of metal also flying around. So we can track pieces of metal that are bigger than about 10 centimeters. Anything smaller than that, we can't track it. So that means you've got things bigger than a bullet, traveling 5 times faster than a bullet, traveling around, and it's basically invisible. This will rip through satellites, it will rip through rockets, like it will just go through anything. It's got so much force and momentum that it can just rip through anything. And you might think this sounds like a hypothetical thing that's going to happen one day in the future, but this has happened already. So in 2018, this happened on the International Space Station, where a piece of metal went through one of the walls and made a hole, and the astronauts kind of had to scramble to try and fix it up so that it wouldn't cause further damage. So this is an active problem that's only going to get worse as we launch more and more satellites. So we have about 5 solutions of what we can do to deal with our satellites, and let's go through each of them. So the first one is do nothing, just kind of leave it floating around in space and kind of hope that nothing too bad happens. This is majority of the time what we kind of do. The thing is, it will very likely, it's going to hit something at some point. The further out it is, the bigger its orbit is, the less likely it is it's going to hit something, but it probably is going to hit something at some point. This is, of course, the easiest thing to do. It doesn't cost us anything, don't need any fuel to move it around or anything. It can kind of just float there. Second solution is we crash it back into the atmosphere. So if a satellite is in low Earth orbit, so this is anything up to about 1,200 miles, it's considered to be like just on the edge of the atmosphere, and the friction from the atmosphere will slow it down and cause it to come back into the atmosphere. So the way they stay up there is they have rocket fuel, and the rockets keep putting up a boost every now and then just to keep them up in orbit and stop them from falling back down. So all you have to do is stop firing the rockets and they'll come back down. Anything smaller than 25 meters will burn up and won't hit the ground. So the only thing that's bigger than that is the International Space Station. So when that is brought down in a few years' time, it will be cut up into pieces so that it doesn't crash down and hit the planet. The main problem with this method, though, is we don't know the environmental impact of crashing these satellites into the atmosphere. We've only done a few satellites, like maybe 100 maximum, that have kind of been like burnt up. It's not many. If we start bringing down thousands, we don't know what's going to happen. So we know that the satellites contain metals. These metals can get into the atmosphere, and they could potentially destroy the ozone layer again. So we're back where we were 30 years ago. So it's something to think about as we start bringing them down in bigger and bigger numbers. We can use a huge net, so like basically literally the same as fishing. Just set up a big net, grab all the satellites, and bring them back down again. The issue with this is it's very expensive if you're sending rockets up to do this and bring them back down. So this has been tested, but as far as I know, there's no plans to actually do something like this. One way you could reduce the cost is reuse the rockets, so the same way that SpaceX are reusing their boosters. What you could do is when the rockets go up to launch the satellite, you can also scoop up a few satellites and bring them back down with it. Another one is using lasers, and you can use what's called a laser broom, that's the actual name. And the idea is not to blow them up like you might think. Instead, what you do is you take very small pieces of metal, so like the ones that are smaller than about 10 centimeters. If you can see them, you could then hit them with the laser, and the laser will heat up one side of it. Space is so cold that the side that's hot will give off heat and make it act like a rocket. So if you do this to ones that are close to the atmosphere, you could push them into the atmosphere and then they would burn up. This isn't just a science fiction thing. The European Space Agency, NASA, the Japanese Space Agency are all putting together proposals to do this. The problem is it's very expensive, so you can either have a thing on the ground shooting lasers up, or you can have a satellite in space shooting lasers across. But there was a proposal in the 1990s that was going to cost $500 million to do, so this isn't cheap. The other thing as well, the final kind of solution we could do is not get rid of our satellites. So at the moment, the solution we're using is like if you're driving down the road in your car and you run out of petrol, you get out of your car and you set fire to your car. We should maybe be reusing them and trying to extend them on longer. So one way to do this is the European Space Agency are launching a mission in 2028 called RISE, and this is going to be a new satellite that can service satellites so it can keep them going for longer. So if they run out of fuel, if their solar panels are broken, it can kind of fix them up and refuel them and keep them going for a bit longer. So these are just a few of the ideas that we've got to keep satellites out of trouble. The problem is if we don't get rid of our satellites, we could end up with this big cloud of like shrapnel kind of going around the planet really fast with all these metal bits flying around, and it could stop us from ever leaving the planet. So if we want to go to Mars or go to Venus or wherever, we wouldn't be able to do it anymore. So it's something that we do need to talk about, is how we bring down these satellites. If you like this video, you might like my previous video that was talking about how we can use stars to navigate. It turns out that Moana isn't complete nonsense and has a lot of historical accuracy in it, so check it out.